Hi, this is Stu Tinker from SK Tours in Derry, Maine, and I'm listening to the Stephen King podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 97 of the Stephen King podcast. And you're here with your host, Lou Sytsma, and today we've got another jam-packed episode for you. We're going to be doing a deep dive on the new HD release of Maximum Overdrive, and to do that, I've called in a specialist, Stephen King specialist, who was actually on the set when Maximum Overdrive was being filmed, and he's been on the podcast before, and that is Tyson Blue. So Tyson Blue will be joining me for that. And I'll also be reviewing Steve Spignesi's latest book on Stephen King called Stephen King, American Master. And that is a nice coffee table book. Would make a great Christmas present for any Stephen King fans in your family. But as usual, we're going to start with the news.
Welcome, welcome. Do not fear the door that lies before you. We will protect you. We are your guides, Hans and Lou, and we will give you the latest in Stephen King news. But before we do so, you must prove yourself worthy. You must open the door and join us in the death room.
As usual, in the multiverse of Stephen King, there's always new news to talk about, and we've got a handful of very interesting items for this installment. First up, The Outsider has been picked up by HBO as a series, and further news on that is that it's going to star Ben Mendelsohn and Jason Bateman. So that is an interesting bit of news, a very exciting news, first off, because it's going to allow the story the proper time to be told in a miniseries. And of course, Ben Mendelsohn has made his name as a movie heavy in the last couple of Star Wars movies and in Ready Player One, which Stephen King fans should check out because it's got an awesome segment of Stephen King related material in it. If I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the movie yet, but it's pretty fantastic. And we're looking forward to seeing this 10 episode limited series to probably air next year. This is very exciting news, and look forward to seeing what HBO is going to do with this series. Now, the interesting thing about this news is that it ties into the recent announcement that Mr. Mercedes was going to get a third season as well. And at the time, in the last podcast, I speculated that this could be what the third season of Mr. Mercedes was going to be about, was The Outsider. But now that we know that's not going to happen, and it makes the theory that I had about them picking up the parts of the book from End of Watch that they left out, dealing with the Zappets and the computer hopping abilities of Brady seem a little more tangible this time. And that's been boasted by a picture that was thrown up on Instagram by the Mr. Mercedes TV account, showing that the book, The End of Watch, with the happy face tennis ball, and it says the rest is still unwritten. So I'm still not saying that my theory about them continuing with the Brady inhabiting other people's minds is gold, but it definitely seems to have more traction this time. So we'll just have to wait and see how that is going to play out for Mr. Mercedes. Turning to movie news, we have news from Dr. Sleep and Mr. Mike Flanagan, the director, late and hot of the Haunting of Hill House Netflix series, saying that Dr. Sleep has wrapped. And I'll just read what he tweeted. So that's a wrap on Dr. Sleep. It's been a long, crazy, truly unique experience. I read the novel as soon as it came out back in 2013. Fascinated and moved by the epic story of Dan Torrance and Amber Stone. But I never imagined for a moment that I'd be the person to bring it to the big screen. It's been an honor to spend the last 5 months with this fantastic cast and crew, and to be trusted with Stephen King's extraordinary story. One of the highlights of my career, without a doubt. Shine on, everyone. Shine on. So, obviously, and in episode 95, I believe, Brian Burnett and I talked about Mike Flanagan's filmography and how excited we were to see what he would be doing with Dr. Sleep based on his handling of The Haunting of Hill House. So I'm really trying, it's really hard to keep my excitement dialed down on this one, but even just reading this tweet from Mike Flanagan, you get it that this guy gets Stephen King. And as he said, shine on, everyone, shine on. And that's what I'm doing, and I hope that you're doing as well, about the possibilities of how good Dr. Sleep is going to be. And in the world of home video, our last news item deals with Pet Sematary. Interestingly enough, as the new one has just landed its trailer about a month ago, and we find out that Mary Lambert is working on a restoration and remastering of her original film adaptation of Pet Sematary. And she's working with Paramount to create an HDR version for all you 4K TV owners. And she says it's going to look amazing. So that's interesting news. And I'm sure it's time to coincide maybe with the release of the theatrical release of the new Pet Sematary. I have no confirmation of that, but from a business sense, if you want to maximize the sales, that would make the most sense to release this updated version when the new one is either in or about to hit the theaters. So we'll have to look forward to that. Once again, a pretty busy Stephen King news month and lots of exciting things for us all to track and keep our eye on. With that is the news.
This is great. What's our job? We'd like drive around, pick up stiffs or what?
It's time for reviews from the night shift.
I'm here with Tyson Blue. Hello, Tyson.
Hello.
Do you remember Tyson was on the podcast before talking about Maximum Overdrive because he actually did a set visit back in the day, and that's more than 40 years ago now. How you feeling age-wise, Tyson?
Older every time I see something like this. When I see a movie that I was old enough to drive up there and go on set and everything, and then realize it was 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's scary how fast time flies. So Vestron Video has just recently released a collector's edition of Maximum Overdrive, which includes for the first time, a Blu-ray edition of the film, and they've done a nice restoration job on it. So there's lots of special features on this as well, 2 commentary tracks and over 2.5 hours of behind-the-scenes extras, which is a really nice time capsule of today versus 40 years ago. So why don't you just set up a little bit the landscape of movie making and Stephen King's debut as a director with this movie?
At this remove, I don't remember how Steve came to direct what he had originally written. I've read 2 or 3 screenplay versions of the movie, and it was just called Overdrive for a while. A Maximum Overdrive kicked in, I think, pretty close to the start of production. And at some point, well, in the interview he did when I did my set visit, he said that he had decided that maybe he could direct this one because there had been a lot of movies made of his books at the time, and that for some reason, even though the pictures themselves were pretty good, that whatever quality it was that made him be Stephen King or made them Stephen King stories was not coming across in the movies. In particular, he picked out Firestarter. He said there wasn't any Stephen King in that one, even though it was a fairly accurate adaptation. And although he did like Silver Bullet a lot, so he thought maybe if he directed it that he would be able to put that in there. He also talked about going to see this movie Stick with Burt Reynolds. It was based on a novel by Elmore Leonard, who was one of Steve's favorite writers. And Leonard had written the screenplay, so he had high hopes for it. But then when he went to see it, he said whatever it was that makes Elmore Leonard be Elmore Leonard was not in that movie for whatever reason. So he thought that if he directed it, that maybe that would work. And I don't know whether it did or not. It was, he can't say it wasn't because he directed it. And it put together the way he wanted. I know that in the trailer, he talks about, I'm going to scare the hell out of you. And it's not a scary movie, really, but I like it better than a lot of people do. Maybe because I think it is tongue-in-cheek. And there are actually some sequences in it that are cut together really well, whether that was Steve's choice of camera angles or was more credited to the editor. I don't know, but there are some things that work really well in there.
Yeah, for sure. I know if you dive into the special features, they talk a bit about the background of how Steve came to direct it. So that's very good information. And again, like I've said this many times, this is one of my guilty pleasure movies. Mm-hmm. And I think it's aged to the point where I don't even consider it a guilty pleasure anymore. I just think it's a really fun movie. And it's got AC/DC doing the soundtrack, which also they're ageless band as well. Mm-hmm. And it's just like for a first director's effort, like you said, we don't know how much the editor cut, how much his influence was on cutting the film. But when you watch the movie, it doesn't seem amateurish from a directing standpoint at all. There's some really nice shots and some good camera angles, and it flows pretty well. So any deficiencies in the movie, I think, come more from the technology and probably the budget. I think the budget on this movie was $10 million, which is still a fairly significant chunk of change back in the day. But I mean, you really only have Emilio Estevez, who headlined the movie and was at that time fairly hot. The rest of the cast was a lot of up and comers later on, but at the time, a lot of them were just starting out as well. So there's like a big gap between Emilio and the rest of the cast, except for Pat Hingle, of course. I
was just about to mention him, who's a solid, well-known character actor who worked steadily. Yeah. And was actually a very nice man on set when I was up there.
And some of these other actors, of course, Esposito, game room character, went on to have a famous part in Breaking Bad.
Mm-hmm. And Yardley Smith is Lisa Simpson, I think.
Yeah. The black truck driver had an appearance in the Silence of the Lambs as a prison guard.
Yeah, actually, he was in every Hannibal Lecter movie except Hannibal Rising, the last one.
Oh, okay.
Because he was in Manhunter, the first version of Red Dragon, and he played the character Barney in the next 3 movies. So
right. Yeah. So the casting was pretty good. It's just unfortunate that, and there's another character actor in there. I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. He also did quite a bit of work. He didn't have a big part in the movie, though. He's more of a background guy. But if you see him in the movie, you'll recognize this. If you've been around as long as we have, you'll recognize him as a character actor in a lot of other things as well. Yeah. Usually played some sort of a slimy businessman type character.
Yeah, and then there was Leon Rippey, who was just starting out, but he's done a lot of things. He was in The Patriot with Mel Gibson, and he's been in a lot of movies. He was the truck.
That's who I'm talking about, yes.
Okay, yeah, he's the guy in the green Dixie Boy T-shirt that gets shot up by the cart with the machine gun on it.
Yeah. And it was an interesting time period with the budget and the technology. This is it's almost like a very guerrilla grindhouse movie when you watch it now, but it doesn't, and this is something that somebody mentioned in one of the interviews from the behind the scenes things, the 80ness of it doesn't really jump out at you that much. I mean, obviously some of the technology is the phones and the cars, the vehicles and that, but it's not something that really limits the movie replayability. Yeah. And it actually adds a charm to it in a certain way. So,
and a lot of the things that figure in the plot of the movie are trucks and wrecker trucks and school buses and small planes. And those things haven't changed that much in the intervening years. So, I suppose they might have had a Gulfstream instead of a propeller-driven private plane or something if they'd had a big budget.
Yeah. And I think what the movie does well too is it captures, or King was able to get his sense of humor, for better or for worse.
Yeah,
it's the movie with all the signs, references, the bank machine, the tasty ice cream truck,
on the Green Goblin toy truck. That was classic.
Yeah, toys truck. Yeah, so I like it from that aspect as well. I think it captures King's personality at that juncture of his life quite well. So. And the characters, they're caricatures, but they represent a lot of the characters that King wrote about back at that time as well, from the overbearing boss to the traveling salesman, the newlywed couple, the kid that's just lost his parent, the resourceful hero. So it checks off a lot of King boxes
Yeah.
that I always get a kick out of as well.
And always, the down to earth, salt of the earth characters, like the drawbridge operator who's sitting there picking it and wiping it on the dash or the instrument panel, or the scene between Emilio Estevez and the other guy working at the gas station in the men's room with all the accompanying noises and splashes and whatnot.
Yeah.
It was the King took a lot of delight in, it's what he called going for the gross out back then too. So
yeah, for sure. So this movie has turned into a really good time capsule, and I think that has really been heightened as well when you see the special features, because a lot of the special features are interviews with actors that were in the movie, and to see them now versus the way they looked back 40 years ago, it's a bit of an eye opener, to say the least, but it's also really gives the whole disc that time capsule quality to it that I have to really commend Western Video, because I think overall this is definitely a worthy addition to anybody's Stephen King movie collection.
Oh, I think so too. And I had a DVD copy of it for years, but it had no special features at all. It had the trailer, and that was pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
No pun intended.
Yeah. So that's the landscape of where this movie was at the time it was released. And just want to get into a little bit about the actual technical aspects of the disc for any home theater enthusiasts. This is not a reference transfer by any stretch of the imaginations, but I think that has more to do with the source material. As we mentioned, this is a $10 million budget movie, so it probably wasn't using the best of film stock and whatnot.
Right, it wasn't. And back then, that was just video was just home video was just really getting started, and I don't think anybody thought about anything beyond a VHS release at that.
Yes, this was for a lot of us the only way that we experienced this film. I never saw this film theatrically. Did you see it in the theater?
Yeah,
you did.
I went to see it the day it opened. I had a grand personal private screening, but
cool.
There was literally nobody in the theater but me.
Oh, that's too bad, because this is definitely a crowd movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for myself, like I said, I only saw this on videotape for the longest time. And it was always, because a significant portion of the movie takes place at night, that just doesn't transfer well to videotape. So it was always a really underwhelming visual experience. So to get this remastered on Blu-ray is just fantastic. And the colors really pop. I have to say that. Everything just so much clearer and sharper, and the biggest benefit to this is the makeup and the special effects, actually, which is kind of surprising if you consider the budget of the movie, that they didn't have the big bucks to do the big special effects. And this was pre-computer graphics again. You have to remember that, in 1985. All of this is practical effects, too.
I was just about to say that, because they talk about that, especially on the effects-related special features, is that it was all practical effects and things that were done in camera. So.
And the other thing that looks a lot better is the tail of the comet, green glow in the sky in that. On the videotape, it looked really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, here it doesn't look great, but it seems to integrate with the picture a little better, because it doesn't bleed as much. So
no, and also the letters had that red on yellow or yellow on red typeface they were using, and that's a lot easier to see than there as well. Maybe it was something to do with greens, actually, because when the Green Goblin truck, the green was more intense and sharp. I mean, that's what the truck looked like when you were there physically looking at it. It was a little washed out on the video release.
And it's interesting looking at the truck in the movie versus the special feature that deals with the restoration job, which is, the guy did a fantastic job, but you can see the shadings like inside the ears and that he didn't do with his restoration. So that was interesting to see as well. What else can we say? Well, the sound, I think the soundtrack portion benefits more than anything else with this remaster. The dialogue sounds a little bit more natural, but I didn't notice a big difference in that respect. The dialogue was always clear. So
yeah, I didn't have much trouble with that. They did a pretty good job of recording it. Even I noticed, there, as far as the attention to making sure everybody on the set was quiet so you could hear what everybody was saying and not talking over people a lot. This wasn't a Robert Altman style movie. In more ways than one. Yeah,
and the camera crew was Italian, right?
Yes.
Did you notice them talking when they were filming scenes? Because that's something one of the actors found distracting.
They may have taken care of that by the time I was there. I was there about 3 weeks before the picture wrapped.
Okay.
and because they were doing night shooting then, and
Right.
I think maybe by that time they had straightened that problem out.
Oh, okay.
They had people, production assistants all over the place, and if you so much as sniffed, they'd glare at you. And they had people around when King was doing the interview with us. It took place in the lunchroom near the cash register of the Dixie Boy, and they had all these cigarette packs on the dispenser over the cash register, where the guy would turn around and get what you wanted. And as he was leaving, he grabbed a pack of cigarettes out of that off of the dispenser, and then looked around real carefully and explained he was making sure the continuity person wasn't around, because they'd come running up and, now Stephen. Apparently he filched cigarettes a lot, and even though you'd only see it panning by as they went, they must have figured somebody in the audience would know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's always that person that is really anal about checking continuity on things, but
well, sometimes it can be right out of the picture, but
yeah. So when you were there for the night shooting, you didn't get to see the Dixie Boy blowing up or anything, did you?
No, they did that. Oh, it was not too long after that, because they were saying at the time, yeah, this is I'd say it's a really nice place. Yeah, too bad we got to blow it all up next week or something like that.
I would have liked to have been around for that.
I'd loved that, especially watching the special features thing about it. I think they had quite a crowd. But yeah, and also complicating matters was that at the time they were actually down to the last 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 nights of shooting. There was a hurricane barreling down on top of them, and they wanted to get it done before then, because who knew what that was going to do, because they weren't that far from the ocean.
Right.
Yeah, actually, the Dixie Boy set, which was made on the parking lot of a factory, was not too far from the drawbridge that you see in the beginning of the movie.
Right. So overall, the technical aspects of the disc, I think, are pretty impressive, especially for this source material. I've never seen the movie look better. So from that perspective, the makeup effects get probably the biggest benefit. I think the blood just really stands out. I don't know if they purposely heightened that or not, but the makeup effects on that look much better than I ever remember them seeing. And the night scenes are just fantastic too.
Well, you get a lot more depth and a lot more color variety on digital formats than you do on videotape. And then and it's been so long since I saw the movie in a theater. I think I only saw it once or twice in a theater, so I don't really remember back what that looked like. But I know I know from home movies that I saw that were made when I was a kid in the 50s, there was a picture of a picnic. And this really is relevant, I promise. Yeah. And it was under some pine trees in a park, and it was maybe not a sunny day, because all you could see was forms kind of moving around in the shadows. And then years later, when I transferred from film to videotape, all of a sudden you could see people moving around. I could tell who they were and that sort of thing. And I'd never been able to see that on the film version. And then I'm sure if I ever transferred them to a digital format, it might be even clearer. So, the movie benefits from the technological advances from transfer to transfer, and within the limitations of the source material, I think it's really the best version of the film I've seen.
Yeah, for sure. The night shots just look so much more natural and have more sense of depth than they do in any other version that I've seen before. And we're in an interesting time too, and this is not really related to Maximum Overdrive, but it's just kind of coincidence. I was watching a special on Peter Jackson's latest project where he's restored World War I footage, black and white to color, and speed corrected it as well. And it just blows your mind to see. It just makes these guys that you've always seen in these herky-jerky black and white videos, they just seem like somebody that you could meet on the street today. That's really an amazing experience. And I don't know if it'll ever get to the point where that technology will get cheap enough that it could be applied to the current library of movies out there. But the possibilities, we think that this looks really good now. Maybe in 20, 30 years from now, this could almost be like holographic. Technology keeps going the way it is. So it's really rather fascinating where that's going.
It could be.
And this is just like first step, I bet you. Anything else you want to say about the quality of the movie or the movie itself?
Not really. Recommend anybody listening who hasn't seen the movie yet, go and check this out.
Right. And that's just the movie.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about the special features. And the movie is, I think, roughly 90 minutes.
Right.
And the special features are over 2.5 hours. And if you actually count the 2 audio commentaries available, that's another 3 hours of material as well. And the audio tracks are really good. And I haven't gotten through them all the way yet, unfortunately. But I really like the approach that they've taken here. They have 2 tracks. The first one is with Tony Magistral, who doesn't talk about this movie specifically, but does basically like a lecture on the history of Stephen King's material and adaptations and his relationship with Hollywood. So I listened to about half of it, and I definitely want to finish it. It sounds really good. And I assume, have you ever met Tony?
No.
No? Okay.
No, at some time or other, I've encountered or corresponded with or met most of the first generation of King scholars, but he's not one of them. It's mainly might be a matter of location more than anything else.
Right. Okay. And probably the most, well, it's not really controversial. I think everybody will say it, but when you're doing something like this, there's a tendency to play it safe, not to say anything too negative, but he does bald-faced that King, when he adapts his own material, the results are usually pretty bad. So I found that refreshing, and there's a lot of things that they talk about, and obviously they're limited by the length of the movie, so they can't get cover King's entire career properly. Like they said, it would take like another 2 commentaries probably to do that. But there's some interesting stuff in there, and I think for King fans that it will definitely be worth your while to check out that one. And I really appreciate the fact that they've done these 2 different versions. And the second one is more the traditional film commentary, where somebody from the production company, Ryan Turek, talking with a comedian. How this pairing got decided, I have no idea, but their commentary is much more movie specific, and they're just talking about their memories and recollections of when the movie came out and things like that. The actor Jonah Jay says that his dad and mom were big Stephen King fans. They read all the books and that, but when they put the movie on, by the time it got to the pop machine hitting the coach in the head, his dad says, no, I can't watch any more of this, and he turned it off. So the guy says he never got to see the movie for quite a while after that. So both commentary tracks are definitely worth listening. They're entertaining, which is probably the most important thing, much like a podcast. We try to be entertaining. You don't want to have dead air.
No.
And they're both informative. So I think they really did a good job with the commentaries, and definitely worth checking out. And I fully intend to finish listening to both of them. So then we have 12 special features added to the disc, and they basically follow the life cycle of a movie production. They talk briefly about the pre-production truck stop tales with Martha De Laurentiis, who I think her name's credited with a different name. She was married to somebody else at the time. She's the daughter of Dino. Did you meet either one of them?
I met her.
Okay.
But she was the hands-on producer for the movie.
Right.
Dino, I don't know where he was.
Yeah. Well, one of the actors said he was at Seaside Hotel.
That's right. He had a condo at the hotel. Holter Graham talks about that. That was where his audition took place.
Yeah. So she talks about it. It's a 16-minute clip. It's fairly informative, and she talks about working with Stephen King, and I thought that was fairly interesting. So
yeah, because she did work. She did work with him on 3 or 4.
Yes, they started with Firestarter.
Yeah, it was Firestarter, Cat's Eye, Silver Bullet, and Overdrive.
Yeah, so those were all, and basically she and Stephen King started the movie industry in North Carolina, which is still ongoing today as they film Mr. Mercedes there,
right,
and Under the Dome as well. So it's interesting to see the genesis of that whole film industry in North Carolina, and it's 40 years later, and it's still ongoing, and it just strikes you again how many lives Stephen King has impacted, either directly or indirectly.
Because the local people, like the newspaper editor, the Chamber of Commerce people, in the one of the special features talk about how the whole town of Wilmington changed when the film industry came in, because everybody would sit there, say it wasn't unusual to run into big stars on the street and things like that, or to see them in a restaurant, and they were coming and going all the time. And although that's slowed down, it's still happening.
Right. And then a lot of the next features talk to some main members of the cast. Laura Harrington, who played Brett in the movie, that's a 10-minute interview. She has some interesting recollections. She mentions Stephen King had the humor of a 9-year-old, and I think that's evident in the film. Yeah. And that's good. But she mentioned at the time that she was a very New York method type of actor, and when she was working with Emilio, he was very spontaneous, let's get it done kind of style of acting. So she said it took her a while to adjust. And also he was part of the Brat Pack at that time. And she said one morning there's a banging on her door and somebody says, come on, we're going to go boogie boarding. And that was Tom Cruise. So, so that was pretty good. And who do we have next? Then we have the Honeymoon Horrors. I love the names for the segments, by the way. I think they did a really good job with them. And that's an 18-minute interview with John Shorey and Yardley Smith, who, of course, we all know from The Simpsons. Curtis and Connie.
Yep.
And again, there's that John was very much methodical. He was classically trained. And Yardley, who is just a delight in her segments in the interview. And she drops some F-bombs in that, so it's not kid safe if you're worried about that kind of thing.
But that was favorites, too, with like her mock Regal posing and stuff.
Yes.
And,
So
and everything. Of course, at the time, in the interview when I was there, Steve singled her out and said she was going to be a really, really big star.
Right.
And she was, although maybe not in the way he envisioned. Everybody
or her
Simpsons, but
because
she's worked constantly. I've seen her in other movies and TV shows. I'm sure she's been on Law and Order because I think Tom Hanks is the only actor I know who's never been on a Law and Order episode.
Yeah. And she also touched on the fact that Amelia was like the hot thing on the movie, and Demi Moore was there at one point, as well as Tom Cruise. And then she said that she had been picked to be the spokesperson for the movie, and they were planning these big promotional tours. But I guess with the movie's reception, that all just sort of fell apart. And just like she never thought that at that point she thought that this was going to be like her big break. And it wasn't really till the movie got into video and cable TV that it started to gain some traction with the public. And so she said, you just never know, right? You work on certain things and they don't go anywhere, but then later on they come back. So that was a pretty good segment. And the actor that played Curtis talks about the tow truck sequence.
Right.
And
he almost got killed.
Yeah, almost got killed because a bar broke on the truck, and the truck didn't go in the direction that they thought it was. He said he wasn't in any danger, but he said if it had swerved left instead of right, he could have been. So, and then the stuntman showed up the next day and said,
"You're never doing that again."
Yeah, no more stunts for you. So some interesting stuff. And through all of these interviews, again, they take these with a grain of salt because nobody's going to obviously trash on anything. But it seems genuine that they all had a really good time, and there was a good sense of family with the cast and the crew. So that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Then we had A Kid in King's Court, which is with Holter Graham, who played Deke, the boy, and that's another 17-minute segment.
Right.
And he was in the running for several other King projects at the time.
Right.
Silver Bullet and Stand By Me.
Right. That surprised me.
Yeah.
Because that was a while before the others.
Right. So, so apparently Sissy Spacek kept his audition tape, and she, for whatever reason, took a liking to him and kept on mentioning his name anytime there was casting calls and whatnot. So finally he hit with Maximum Overdrive. And in a way, I'm sure if he had his druthers, he would rather have been remembered to being connected with something like Stand By Me.
Right.
But on the other hand, he was pretty happy with his connection to Maximum Overdrive. He says it was a pretty good time, and it's a very fun movie. So
yeah, and that was one of the things I found interesting was the coincidental pairing with Stephen King work, and throughout his early career, the things he was being considered for, and the connection through Sissy Spacek, who of course starred in Carrie. It was an interesting coincidence or whatever it was that kept on until he finally got this role. And I don't remember seeing him in many other movies. The only I don't remember until I saw him in Fly Away Home with Anna Paquin, and by then he was an adult. And then of course now there's the King connection is still there because he reads a lot of Steve's audiobook.
Okay.
So
I wasn't aware of that. Oh, okay.
Especially on a lot of the short story collections. He reads some of those because the way they seem to pick readers for those are people that have been in King movies or have some sort of connection. And he's done quite a few of them. I think he read, what was the Amazon only? Was it the Kindle book?
Yeah.
I think he read that one.
Oh, okay.
Among others.
Yeah. See, I don't do a lot of audiobooks yet, but that's good to know. He also related 3 King tidbits that I found very interesting that I wasn't aware of before. One for the movie production is that at the burger place, the voice is King's voice. I don't know if you mentioned that when you were on before, Tyson. If you did, and I've forgotten, I apologize.
I'm not sure if I did or not.
Yeah, and the other one was they were doing a practice scene in the culvert where the Bible salesman was lying, and King took his place to help Holter block out the scene in that, and King just lied in the mud, and he grabbed the kid, and he wouldn't let go, and he said he was throwing out mud all over King, and King just laughed and said, "You do good mud, kid." So that was good. And the other thing that he mentioned was while they were filming the baseball scenes, he said King was sitting at some sort of little computer. He says, back then it was probably really expensive, but King could afford it, he said. And he says, "How's it going?" He says, "Pretty good." He says, I'm writing a story about a clown," which of course later on turned out to be it. So again, an interesting time capsule back to where King was back in the 85. So, and then I think for me that actually the most interesting segment is the Maximum Carnage with Dean Gates, the makeup and special effects head on the movie, and he just talks about how they would tend to film two versions of everything, so a holdback version versus a gory version, and a lot of times the gory version didn't make it into the movie, and of course, which is unfortunate.
And of course, the most famous one, which is the only real disappointment on this release. I'd hoped we'd finally get to see the famous head popping scene that Steve described to me on numerous occasions, where had Dean stuff a baggie of blood in the dummy's shirt of the little kid gets run over by the steamroller, and because he thought the bag would pop and it would print across the ball field, and instead the bag got pushed up and up and up until the roller was running over the kid's head, and then the bag exploded, and it just looked like the kid's head burst open. And I was hoping, supposedly when Steve tells the story, that he showed it to George Romero, and when he came to that scene, and Romero turned his head and hissed, it was oh great, I got to George, but it didn't show up.
It's an interesting Dean Gate mentions too that they filmed a version where they just left the stuffing in the original stuffing in the dummy, which was like foam pillows stuff, and he said that when that popped, he said all that white stuff came popping out of the head, and he said that actually looked worse than the blood version, so because it was so different, right? So unexpected. So I would have loved to seen that footage too.
And who knows, it may be somewhere, because for decades, the scene in Frankenstein, 1931 version, where Boris Karloff actually picks the little girl up and throws her in the water.
Right.
People thought that was lost, but then it turned up in a can full of film scraps for another movie, and has been restored to the film. So maybe someday those things will turn up.
All right. Yep. You never know. It's just too bad they didn't get them for this release, because it's doubtful that we'll never ever get another special edition version.
Right.
And then there's a half-hour segment on the Wilmington factor, and this is just talking to locals about the effect that not just this movie, but the Stephen King's films in general have had for the Wilmington, North Carolina area. So it's interesting to see these locals talking about it from their perspective. I especially like the one guy that talked about seeing like a pickup truck, and then somebody jumps out, and then he yells "chow" to everybody in the truck. Yeah. He says these two things just don't go together in this town. No. But he says that's how we became a cosmopolitan center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I enjoyed that one too, because that wasn't anything I'd ever really thought about. And I'm sure. Well, I know they made a couple of TV miniseries there, and I'm sure that DEG made other movies other than King projects while they were located there as well. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but for a while, and no, it was really booming.
Yeah,
as a place to make movies without having the added cost of being in Los Angeles or New York. And it had weather comparable to California, except when hurricanes come through.
Yeah, you'll have to write a story about that sometime.
Yeah,
instead of like Storm of the Century. Yeah, those are probably the meatiest special features. The next ones aren't as in depth. They're still pretty good though, but they're not as directly related to the production. There's a 6-minute AC/DC Who Made Who bit, which is interesting about the writer historian saying that AC/DC was floundering a little bit at that point in their careers, and he believes that song and the album, which was a greatest hits album, turned things around for the group and got them going again. So
yeah, I remember at the time when just before the movie released, when King did a publicity tour, and I went to the one in Atlanta, and King came in 30 minutes late, apologized, said he had to stop and make a dope deal, which got a big laugh, and because most of us thought he was joking, although now I guess it turns out that might have been for real. But in the course of that, he mentioned, we talked about the soundtrack album a little bit, and I had mentioned that I thought it was strange that it was pictured like it was just another AC/DC album. It had the picture of standing on top of the stairs with columns around him and everything, and it didn't say anything except on the back cover a little mention about of the film's name. And he said, yeah, he was surprised at that too, because basically some of that stuff had been on 2 or 3 albums already.
Yeah. As I mentioned, the remaster, I think the soundtrack benefits the most from the added audio quality.
Yeah,
and
so too.
It really has a lot more vibrancy and range. So that's an added bonus, especially how AC/DC's been around for so long now. It's nice to get that in a better quality.
Yeah.
Then the next feature is a 10-minute long one. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something about?
No, it was at about that time that I became an AC/DC fan. So there might be something to that, rejuvenating them.
Yeah. On the second commentary, I think they raise an excellent point, because again, you have to remember this is the pre-internet, pre-streaming, pre-Spotify, iTunes era. A lot of people hadn't heard of AC/DC until the movie. So for the one guy said this was his introduction into this type of music. So, that's pretty cool as well.
Before, I knew they were out there, but I had basically just thought of them as a heavy metal band, and I'm not a real big metal fan. But when I sat down and listened to this thing, I said, no, these guys are just a really loud, driving rock band. I kind of like this stuff.
Yeah, they don't do ballads.
No.
So. The next feature, and this is one I was familiar with, and is the Goblin Resurrectus. I love that. I think this is my favorite name segment out of all the special features. And this is a 10-minute interview basically with Tim Shockey, who found the pretty well destroyed Goblin's head from the production and restored it, though he didn't do it right away. It sounds like he let it sit in his video store for a couple of years, and then when he sold that business, it was in his garage or backyard. And he started that in 2011, said it took him 2 years, and it turned out looking really good. And now he's turned it into a sideline business, I guess you could say, where he takes it to conventions and whatnot, and people can get their picture taken with it. So that's cool.
Yeah, because I wanted to get my picture taken with it when I visited the set, but I couldn't take any pictures because everything was embargoed at the time. Although I did manage to sneak a couple of pictures of blown up tractor trailers and a picture of the set from across the highway, but I didn't want to get thrown off the set or anything. Plus, this was that set visit, and the stories that it generated basically jump-started my career as an expert on King's work, because it got me more work writing for Twilight Zone magazine and for Castle Rock and other things. That was basically the springboard. So I didn't want to mess that up just to get a couple of pictures. So maybe he'll come close to me sometime and I can finally get that picture. But I got a kick out of that one too, because it reminded me of the featurette on George Pal's version of the Time Machine, where he tells about what happened to the time machine that was built for that movie afterwards. It had this long journey, basically almost falling apart, and then somebody who cared got a hold of it and restored it.
Yeah, it's unbelievable sometimes how these what we think of as iconic props or sets just are thrown out. I realize it's a business to the movie studios and that, but sometimes you would think they would see the value in keeping some of these pieces around and touring them and making money off of them. Yeah, I think we've all heard stories about what was Star Trek sets, the original shuttlecraft and the bridge set, or the Next Generation.
Or even the Enterprise itself, because by the time the Smithsonian acquired it, it was pretty ratty looking.
Yeah. So,
although now it's been restored and it's gorgeous. But
yeah, have you seen it?
Yes, a couple of times.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That must be nice. That's something I'd like to do someday. But
moves around. It's in the Air and Space Museum in Washington, and it moves around. I'm not sure where it is right now. It was in the gift shop when I saw it, but one of my sons has been there more recently, and he said it's moved.
Okay. Well, as long as they keep it in public viewing, that's the main thing. So what do we got? Oh, then we get into one of the cool segments, and I wish there was more of it, is some of the behind-the-scenes footage, which is only it's about 9 minutes, and it's mostly restricted to night shooting stuff. So a lot of time you can't even make out who's who, but you do get a couple of quick shots of King in his directing chair, which is cool. And you definitely can hear him yell "cut" several times. So and so they have footage from when they blow up the Dixie Pig, and I always say Dixie Pig, it's Dixie Boy. I get the Dark Tower. So I'm surprised he hasn't tied that in yet somehow. And the other one's with the plane crashing, having crashed into the bus, and the band of survivors running by it and that stuff. So
yeah, to see that. Although I sure would like to see that head popping scene.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. It's I always get a kick out of these special features because they always seem to use, when they use footage from the movie, it's always obviously from a previous release, because when you see it, and I guess it's an unexpected added bonus for you viewers, is when you see the footage that they're using from the previous releases, you can see how much better the restored version of the movie looks, because the stuff that they use for clips and these segments it looks really bad in comparison.
Yeah. Well, especially because they're showing second generation of a film image, and it only restores so much.
Yeah.
You'd almost think they'd go to the trouble of intercutting the restored version.
Yeah, that's what I would do, but I guess they can't get their hands on it, or I don't know, maybe it's a rights issue thing. I don't know.
It could be, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Then there's a still gallery that runs for 6 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these photos I've seen before, so I don't know how, but I have. I think they were up on the internet somewhere. But, it's nice to have them in that plain clip, and they're all of good quality, which is nice as well. Yeah. So. And then we get the trailer and the TV spots, and the trailer is great because it gives because you've always seen segments of King's promo for it, but in the trailer you get the whole deal.
Right.
It's a fairly good quality, and King says, but nobody's directed it like I've ever directed a Stephen King story. Right. And it's a nice time capsule as well. So those are all the special features. Overall I give them a really high marks for what they got here. And with a lot of other projects, it's just too bad that King and Emilio Estevez are not present on any of these special features, which seems to be the way with these. The more high profile the actor, the less likely the chance of them taking part in these special features seems to be.
Yeah, especially with so much time intervening between that maybe at this stage in his career, Emilio Estevez didn't want to look back on that.
Maybe. But he's not doing much now. So.
No, but he does a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, and he directs and produces. But I can't remember the last time I actually saw him out front.
Right, yeah.
Might have been this movie. But
yeah, I don't know. And, of course, King, I don't know what his stance is on the movie now. Is he proud of it or likes to forget it? I don't really know. I've never seen anybody ask him about it at any of his tour appearances for his other books or in the subsequent years, which is too bad because I'm really curious.
It would be interesting. I mean, I can understand, since it wasn't a huge commercial success when it was released, that maybe he wouldn't want to talk about it too much. But on the other hand, for something like this, it seemed like he might want to comment. I'm sure they tried contacting him about it, but for reason, or he may have just been busy because he's busy possible. All the time.
Somebody out there, if anybody listening has the opportunity to interview Stephen King, please ask him what he thinks of Maximum Overdrive after all these years. I'm really curious. It's one of those unasked questions about King that I'd like to hear. It's been 40 years. I think with the perspective of time in that, he could talk about it in a more dispassionate viewpoint, and because it's one of those movies that's actually aged quite well. So I'd really like to hear his thoughts on it.
Yeah, I would too. Actually, because I know at the time, or close to the time, he was. Well, actually, one of the reporters asked him if he'd like to do it again, and at one point he wanted to direct the Shining remake, which he also wrote.
Right.
But he didn't. Mick Garris did, so not sure why, but there's time yet. He may do it again.
But I think it just highlights that, and we're seeing this now with J.K. Rowling, who is doing the writing for the
Fantastic Beasts series.
Yeah, just because you're talented in one area doesn't necessarily means that translates into another. And the collaborative nature of filmmaking versus the solitary nature of writing, two different beasts, and they're two pieces of entertainment that have quite different requirements in terms of how to deliver a story and pacing and things of that nature as well. So it's not always an easy transition for somebody to work in one medium and then try it in another.
No.
So that's about everything I've got on this disc. I highly recommend it. It's not the definitive version, I would think, at this point. Well, it is, but it's not the ultimate version, is what I should say, because it's not. It doesn't have a couple of key personalities added to the behind the scenes stuff, which is too bad. So I would have loved for King to have done a commentary, if nothing else.
Even now, it would have been relevant. Maybe looking back on it from this far removed, especially, it would be interesting. He could say, you know, what he thought, what he still thinks was really good, what's cringeworthy nowadays, but or things like that would be.
Yeah, because he's on Twitter all the time, you know, saying you should read this book, you should watch this movie. So it's not like he's divorced himself from media. He's definitely still out there doing that kind of stuff. So that would be good.
It could fit it in between jibes at Trump and the latest doings of Molly, the Thing of Evil.
That's right. What do you think about the disc?
I agree pretty much with you. It's a vast improvement over the DVD release. Although there are things that are missing that I'd like to see. Again, King's comment, that steamroller scene. There's a lot that is interesting there. There are things I learned about that I wasn't aware of, especially in the Holter Graham and Yardley Smith interviews. And I think it's well worth picking up for anybody who's interested in King movies or even ones by him. From the screenplays I've read, it sticks pretty close to what his original concept was, although there are some differences. Maximum Overdrive screenplay goes on and shows things that happened to them once they got to the island offshore that didn't allow vehicles, although somehow a dune buggy had gotten there. And but it was, I think the movie does age well, in part because it deals with vehicles whose appearance haven't changed much over the years, so it fits into any time frame. Although, you know, cell phones would make a current version of it interesting, although they're machines too, so who knows what they'd be doing. Although that's another movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was still better than the god-awful TV remake with Timothy Busfield that came out a few years later. And overall, I'd recommend it a lot.
Yeah, very good. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think one of the actors in the segment said that they should do a remake of this movie itself. He says it's more relevant today because of our smart cars and the internet and cell phones and all this kind of stuff. So
actually, that might not be a bad idea.
And it's just the technology that they have available too for CGIing certain aspects of the movie would definitely look a lot better. But I think it's the charm that this movie has, that very grounded, physical, practical effects feel to it. Mm-hmm. We see so much CGI now that when you get a chance to see something done practically, it's a real treat.
No, actually, that one, a contemporary reworking of that might be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah,
but,
sure.
But until then, we've got this, which is well worth the effort to track down and pick up. I had to get it from Amazon. It wasn't something I could pick up in my local store.
Yeah, same here. I mean, there's a lot of special releases or special editions of King stuff coming out lately from Shout, and
they just did Creep Show, and I was watching some of the special features on that last night, and they had clips from the restored movie integrated into it. And although I haven't sat down and watched the whole movie, especially with the comic book filming style of the movie and the bright primary colors and so on, that really pops on that. So I'm looking forward to watching that one.
Okay, cool. I haven't picked that up yet. It's on my to-buy list, I guess you could say. But this definitely looks really cool. Before I let you go, just get what your state of Stephen King status is in terms of, have you read all his recent books? Watched all the TV series? I
haven't seen a lot of the TV series. I've not watched Castle Rock yet, although I plan to, because members of my family that have seen it say it's really good. I mean, initially I wasn't going to chase it down too much because I'd heard, they were just going to be kind of spinning off material, but then I've heard good things about it. So I think I will track that one down.
Okay. What about books?
No, I think I'm current with books. I just finished Elevation. Well, shortly before it came out. It's so short I'd actually read it twice by the time it finally hit the stores.
All right.
And I enjoyed that. It's very different, of course.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. Castle Rock seems to be a place for different things nowadays between Gwendy's Button Box and Elevation. Mm-hmm. Seems to be a kinder, gentler place for some reason.
Yeah. Just a reminder to any of our listeners who are just coming in on this episode, Steve Spignesi and I just in the previous episode released our review of that, and we both basically gushed about it. We really enjoyed that story quite a bit. And The Outsiders also, I really enjoyed that book. I thought it was one of King's better books probably since maybe 11/22/63. I mean, I enjoyed the Mr. Mercedes books, different style of book, but I thought The Outsider felt like old school King.
Right, it did. And I liked the fact that it didn't go where you thought it was going to go. It was all like Hitchcock's Psycho. You've got this thing building up, and you get all this sympathy for the main character, and bang, 20 minutes into it, he's gone.
Yeah.
It takes off in a whole new direction.
Yeah.
I didn't expect Holly to turn up. I'd heard he was working on a follow-up to the Mr. Mercedes books featuring her, but I had no idea that The Outsider was that book.
Right.
So I was surprised. I liked when that happens. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I agree. He really subverted expectations with that book. That was definitely, it was a good year for Stephen King written material. And we just recently learned that he has another book done, and that's going to be out next year. Have no clue what it's about.
No.
I'm hoping for something brand new. Failing that, it either is going to be a Holly standalone book or another Dark Tower book. Maybe The Battle of Jericho Hill.
Yeah, we keep getting teased with that.
Yeah.
So I hope finally shows up.
Yeah. And then him and Mr. Straub have to get together and finish off the Talisman.
Yeah, they were talking about that.
Yeah.
Straub's been health problems lately, so I hope they resolve themselves and that they'll go ahead and do that. Because I know that they were talking about doing it last year, and then that didn't happen.
Yeah.
No, I've enjoyed what he's been putting out lately. Also, since you said you don't do too many audiobooks, the audiobook for Elevation, it's read by King, because it's basically such a short story. He also includes Lori, the story that he offered for free on his website a while back.
Right.
On there, which it's not even mentioned on the packaging for the book, because while I was waiting in line at Barnes & Noble yesterday, I picked it up off the rack and was looking it over, even though I'd already listened to it. And they don't mention it at all.
Yeah, and that was a good story too. Definitely written from a perspective of a much more mature writer. So he's leading the way for us who are a bit younger than him. Yeah, that's why I always think of him as like my older brother. He's roughly 10 years older than me. So
got about 5 years on me, but still.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this disc.
Always glad to do it,
Tyson. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody. I'm here with a quickie review for you guys, for the Stephen King fans in your family. This might be a great stocking stuffer. It's Stephen Spignesi's Stephen King, American Master, a creepy corpus of facts about Stephen King and his work. And this is a 421-page paperback, large format. It's 6x9. And with it, the Stephen King fan in your family, or yourself, of course, will find this a nice, handy book to read in its small-sized bites. Or if you want to really dive into the book, there's the first section of the book, part 1, which is filled with some great interviews dealing with Stephen King from other notable Stephen King writers, his peers, such as probably the jewel of the book, or not probably, but for sure, the jewel of the book is the tag team Richard Matheson and Richard Christian Matheson, who is Matheson's son, and they both talk about Stephen King. Some fantastic stuff in there, and especially so because I'm a big Matheson fan, and I think if you're a King fan, you really need to find out as much as you can about Richard Matheson, because in many ways he's the prototype of the Stephen King writer, and he's got some great works as himself. He also wrote some of the most famous science fiction novels that became scripts for movies. There's the I Am Legend, which was filmed as The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, the Omega Man with Charlton Heston, and most recently, I Am Legend with Will Smith. Of course, he also penned in 1956 The Shrinking Man, which was later turned into a movie, The Incredible Shrinking Man, and that's a recent Stephen King connection as well, because the lead character of that novel and King's latest novel, Elevation, is Scott Carey. So that's definitely another one to check out. And also Matheson wrote A Stir of Echoes, which became the basis for the film that starred Kevin Bacon. So then we get our 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon between Matheson and Stephen King. So there you go. So that is definitely the crown jewel interview. And there's also a follow-up piece with his son, which unfortunately is only an excerpt. I'd wish that the book contained that full interview as well, but it doesn't, which is too bad. And then after that, you've got interviews with Bev Vincent, Robin Firth, Tyson Blue, who was on this podcast with me doing the review of the Maximum Overdrive Blu-ray Special Edition. We've got Kevin Quigley, Hans Lilia, who of course you all know from this podcast and from his website, Rick Hatchula, who unfortunately passed away recently. Mothers are Mick Garris. And then in part 2, and this is the part where you can just use the book as a reference book, is the Creepy Corpus, which documents King's novels, his short stories, novellas, nonfiction, poems, rarities, uncollected, unpublished short stories and other works, and some random thoughts. And really helpful, this book is heavily indexed so that if you want to look up the specifics of a particular story, you can just go to that index and then find it in the book. And if you just randomly open up the book, let's just do that in the second section. 2 Past Midnight, a note on Secret Window, Secret Garden. This essay first appeared in 4 Past Midnight in 1990. Introduction to Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door. This essay was written by King and first appeared in the 1995 Overlook Connection press edition of The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. King is a big fan of Jack Ketchum, which is the widely known pseudonym of the late Dallas Meyer. And in this essay, he puts Ketchum's work, particularly The Girl Next Door, in context as one of the great suspense novels of all time. He'll make you want to read it if you haven't already. So that's what the second half of the book is all about. And it's a large paperback. For American listeners, it's on Amazon for $11. So this is a very reasonably priced item. And I know that in the Canadian Amazon site, it was with the dollar difference and whatnot, it was a bit more expensive, but still it was under $20. So it's definitely something worth checking out. It's got some great interviews. And the second half of the book, as I just demonstrated, is a collection of some really cool and probably unknown facts to a lot of Stephen King fans. So, once again, check it out. Stephen King, American Master, A Creepy Corpus of Facts and Fiction About Stephen King and His Work by Stephen Spignesi. And it's available now wherever you go to get your books. So there you go, peoples. Podcast 97 is in the can and out for your listening pleasure. And wow, this is the last podcast of 2018. Can you believe it? Another year has flown by, and man, oh man. Another great Stephen King year for sure. So our next podcast won't drop until sometime in January. And that will be one of the podcasts which I always enjoy doing is a look back at the year that has just passed. And then, of course, the podcast following that, number 99, will be a look ahead to 2019. And we still live in pretty glorious Stephen King times. There's new material coming out all the time. And this second King renaissance has been pretty amazing and just doesn't seem to be losing steam at all, which is fantastic. So look forward to that. And before I sign off, I just want to wish each and every one of you a happy holiday and a very happy new year. And we'll look forward to continuing this journey in 2019. That should be a very interesting year. Anyhow, all the best, everyone. Take care. Stay safe, but stay scared. The end. Bool. Bye-bye. Happy New Year.